Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Welcome. Today, I want to discuss the origins of the first political party system in the U.S. That thing with the Democrat-Republicans versus the Federalists. Where that came from. Some people call this the Hamiltonian-Jeffersonian split. Alexander Hamilton being the first Secretary of Treasury, Jefferson being the first Secretary of State. We'll play with that. What I really want to focus on right now is Alexander Hamilton and what he did as Secretary of Treasury. Um, Now Hamilton had one very important thing going for him. Hamilton, in fact, he's the only person on the money, on all the dollar bills, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, everybody, who had this benefit. Alexander Hamilton was not born in the United States. He was actually born in the Caribbean. That's important because that means he can never be president. And if he can never be president, he has no political aims, which means he doesn't care who he pisses off. That's going to be a great strength. This is why Cheney could eat puppies and beat up children and and he didn't care what you thought, right? Last vice president. Okay. With me? Got it. Okay. All right. So let me focus on three things that Hamilton did. The first was he wanted to assume all the debt of the Revolution that the states had. Each individual state had borrowed for the Revolution, and he wanted to assume all that debt. It came out to $52 million. This is a huge chunk in the 1700s. Well, this way, if you do this, all the foreign countries have kind of hope and support for your government. It's kind of saying, as a country, that we are going to back up our financial responsibilities. The other brilliance of it is how he proposed to pay it. He proposed to pay it with something called US Treasury bonds. Now, he kind of invented this. He stole the idea from the English. But it's simply, you would sell these bonds to somebody. At the end of 20 years, that person could cash them in with a little bit of interest. They're secured. They're standard. Yes, this is what all our national debt is wrapped up in today. That China and Saudi Arabia and everybody else owns, right? Okay. His brilliance is that he sold it to the business community in the United States. He sold it to the merchants. He's going to sell it to the factory owners, although factories aren't really with us yet. And what that does is it gives those businessmen a vested interest in the success of the United States. Because very simply, if the U.S. government fails, those bonds are worth nothing. They're worth absolutely zero. All right. This is great. It's going to help the economy, etc., etc. The problem is the southern states had mostly paid off their debt. So they were not in favor of it, especially Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison had this meeting. And in the meeting, they struck a bargain that within 4 years, the capital would be moved from Philadelphia to Potomac River. That's how we get Washington, D.C. where it is today. Longer story. Read it in your book. Pretty interesting. All right. Second point. Second thing Hamilton does. He tries to set up something called the First Bank of the U.S. Now, the idea of the Bank of the U.S. is it's a private and publicly owned bank. It prints all U.S. money. It holds all U.S. government money. But also it can take public money as well. Meaning you or I could go put money in the bank just like we normally would. It's actually 80% of all the money in the bank was actually given by people, because it does go through. 20% was actually given by the government. That's the idea. Well, the idea, again, this supports business. This supports these merchants and trade and business because this bank can use U.S. government funds to lend money. That's how banks make money. They lend money to people. So the bank's making money. There's more money being lent to business. It's an influx into the economy. It's the same reason that today you see the bailout putting tons of money into the banks. The only problem is the banks aren't actually lending. Well, that's another story. Okay. Here's the problem. Here's the holdup. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that the government or anybody can set up a national bank. Well, Jefferson says you can't do this. It's not in the Constitution. And we need to keep to a, quote, strict interpretation of the Constitution. Hamilton, to get this through, goes, oh, well, we can take a loose interpretation of the Constitution. That the Constitution has implied powers, and we can use those implied powers. Now, please remember, Madison and Hamilton are on the two sides of this debate. These are two guys who, more than anybody else, wrote the document, and they're disagreeing on what it even means. All right. Well, it goes back and forth over this implied power versus strict interpretation. Um, Eventually, Hamilton's going to win out. Washington is going to side with him. He'll win out. He will get his Bank of the U.S. But there's one more event that really shows us this kind of Hamiltonian mindset. And it's called the Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. Now, I'll read in your book what the Whiskey Rebellion is all about, but I'll tell you what started the Whiskey Rebellion. Is that Hamilton did not want to tax the businesses anymore. He didn't want to put tariffs, which charged every time you import and export. He didn't want to put tax on goods, which meant that the merchants weren't making as much money. So instead, he taxed whiskey. He put a 25% tax on whiskey. Now, this didn't just anger people because they liked their whiskey, although I'm sure it did. It angered people because these Pennsylvania farmers on the frontier cannot actually load up all their wheat, carry it all the way up over the mountains and back down the other side and make any money. However, if they distill all that wheat into liquor, whiskey, you can transport it up over at a higher profit. So what you've done is you put a high tax on whiskey for people who are trying to make money to pay their taxes. So the tax is so high on whiskey that they don't have enough money to pay their taxes on their homes. They're losing their homes, so they go out and start burning courthouses. Because the courthouses have the records, and the idea, and think back to Fight Club, if you will, if they burn all the courthouses, all the records are gone and no one can get taxed. Again, this is a problem. So you see these three instances where Hamilton is doing ideas to support business to grow the country fast. This gets into the difference between the two parties. Because after these three events, this is where the split will happen. On one side, you've got Jefferson and Madison with Democrat Republicans, interested in small farmer utopia, read all about it, interested in stability. On the other side, you'll have Hamilton and the Federalists interested in supporting business, this kind of fast growth that will grow the economy. These are two very different visions. Play with that idea. We'll talk to you soon.